With us, the Scotsman's Political Correspondent Rachel Amery, the Public Affairs Strategist and former SNP MP Stewart McDonald, and the General Secretary of the STUC, Foyer. Thanks for joining us tonight. Let's pick up on that interview with the Justice Secretary first. Rachel, I'm not sure I've heard Angela Constance give us that indication of the numbers for the next tranche of early releases, totalling up to about 1,000, just in time for the election, conveniently.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just thinking. It's quite a large number, significantly higher than the previous early release scheme that we saw from the Scottish Government there. And very interesting, this will be immediately before the Scottish Parliament election. An election, of course, where Angela Constance's party, the SNP, is currently polling in first place. So that's a big, bold move for the party to be making right before that. I think Angela Constance, watching that interview there, I think she does understand the impact this will have on both the prison estate and the wider community here, but she's very much sort of backed into a corner here where we're sort of in this cycle of releasing prisoners early, but then nothing really happens when it comes to the big numbers, and so we get back to the same position in a few months' time. So this early release scheme, it's kind of dealing with the crisis end of the problem here in the prison estate, but there's so many other factors feeding into that, and that's kind of what the prison estate and the Justice Secretary needs to concentrate on if we're going to escape this cycle of early release.
And Stewart, the Justice Secretary there, warning that there is a risk of disorder unless this happens.
Yeah, I think she will understand that well. Angela Constance comes from a social work background herself, so she will understand this quite deeply. But I think what we've heard and what we've seen in previous release schemes, and we're seeing this south of the border as well, are how do we deal with these problems in the short term? Now, that has to happen. Those problems do need to be dealt with, and dealt with swiftly and appropriately. But what seems to be missing here is a more long-term plan. And what would be good, and I realise I'm being overly optimistic so close to an election, would be for the parties to work together on this. This isn't unique to Scotland. It's a very serious problem, and I think it is something that parties need to put forward some
but there's no chance of that, is there?
Constructive proposals on. Well, look, she said she's willing to hear them, so let's see what happens. I accept you're probably right there, Colin, but nobody, you used the phrase yourself that the prisons used to be called powder kegs. Nobody wants to see a return to that, certainly not right before an election, as Rachel rightly says. So fine in the short term, brave right before an election, but we need to get the long-term problem fixed.
Ros, is early release the right answer?
Well, I think given where they're at, it's probably the only answer for now, and there's no doubt from watching that and given the numbers that our prisons aren't safe, and that means not safe for prisoners, and importantly not safe for the people who work in them at this point in time. So we need to see that addressed urgently, but ultimately we need to move from being reactive to being proactive, and I was interested to see the comment that the root causes of this are not being addressed. And for me, we need to start looking at, and I'd like to see some consensus around more community sentencing that might actually give us better results in terms of rehabilitating people than prison sentences do for non-violent crimes, and maybe look at the real root causes, which are poverty and austerity and drug use in our communities, and really tackle some of those deeper causes that lead people to ending up in custodial sentences.
But the question the Conservatives raise is letting people out early, before the end of their actual sentence. Is that safe for communities?
Well, every case has to be judged on its merits. I mean, the Conservatives were doing this when they were in government, when I was still at Westminster, and indeed this has been a big debate in the House of Commons today, because the Labour government are having to do it south of the border as well. What's absolutely critical here, we've had this case down south where a guy has been released on an early release scheme by mistake. He was a sex offender, a particularly violent sex offender. Things like that absolutely cannot happen. So it's important that whether it's the government, the Scottish Prison Service, all of the bodies, the governors, work really intensively to get this right. But from what I understand, Colin, these aren't people who are going to be let out 3-4 years in advance. They were coming to the end of their sentence
within
anyway.
6 months of the end of a sentence of less than 4 years.
But they need to get that right, not just because there's an election, I should say, but in many ways, especially because there's an election.
Well, let's move on. At Westminster, MPs have been scathing about the UK government housing asylum seekers in hotels, including this one in Falkirk, which has been the focus of a number of protests. The Home Affairs Committee report says the Home Office squandered billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on the scheme. Stewart, you dealt with the Home Office as an MP. Is this highly critical report right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I still have the scars from dealing with the Home Office. By a country mile, the worst department to deal with in Whitehall. And it will be the case for many MPs here in Scotland, especially here in Glasgow, that it will take up, I imagine, about 60+% of the casework that comes through their doors. And, you know, as you know, Colin, I used to shadow the MOD and they could spend money like it was going out of fashion. I think the Home Office have provided some strong competition there. But again, what's needed here is there's a lot of kind of performative jousting between the parties on this issue. It's getting to quite the tinderbox point of the debate. The heat needs to be taken out of that, and we need to have some serious long-term planning, not just to prevent this sort of stuff from happening again, but to take the heat out of what's becoming an increasingly toxic issue.
Rachel, because the heat has been ramping up, Labour have been trying to cast some shade on the SNP over this row as well, in Glasgow particularly. Yeah,
I think Glasgow is where the focus has been, because I think the report today said that it's got about 400 times more asylum seekers than the government's plan should have. So that's kind of where all the focus has been. But yes, all the parties are kind of blaming each other here. The SNP want to blame the UK government, the Labour Party wants to blame the Scottish government because certain issues here are reserved, certain issues are devolved. And so this is perhaps an issue where it will just keep going round in circles until the blame game stops, perhaps. That's kind of the big issue at the moment.
Ros, you've campaigned on this, you've marched on this.
Absolutely. I think that you're right about the really serious issues that are going on here and the need not to have them taken advantage of by people with really, really poor aims. But we've got a situation where asylum seekers come to our country, they need to be treated with humanity and dignity. And what I saw in the report that came out from the Home Affairs Committee today is that there's been a fair deal of profiteering by private contractors going on, and that is just a mark of failure by government. We should be making sure that that money is going to local authorities and that our public services are dealing with how to disperse people in a way that gives them dignity. It's not good for asylum seekers to live in hotels. It's certainly not good for the communities either. And we need to take the heat out of this debate and actually make sure that we're not playing the blame game here.
But Labour now seems to be picking up on the suggestion from the Conservatives and from Reform to put them in camps on old army bases.
Well, you know, punching down and treating asylum seekers worse, people who have gone through some terrible circumstances in war-torn places and ended up here seeking a better life is not the answer. And I have to say, in Scotland, we actually need migration. Lots of asylum seekers who come to our shores are highly qualified people who can do a job of work in our country, who can contribute positively to our economy. So yes, let's process the applications speedily, but let's treat people with respect and dignity. And the best placed people to do that are frankly our local authorities who know how to house people, disperse people, look after people.
Well, Labour has a new deputy leader. Lucy Powell was considered the left candidate. She certainly wasn't the leadership's choice. Remember, she was sacked from government by Sir Keir Starmer. She wants the party to change.
Unity and loyalty comes from collective purpose, not from command and control. Debating, listening and hearing is not dissent, it's our strength. As your deputy, my commitment is to change the culture to get this right.
Rachel, on Saturday they didn't even let the journalists into the declaration of the result. Labour seems to have been trying to play this whole thing down.
Well, I think if you look at here in Scotland, the big problem for Labour right now is how they're doing in the polls when it comes to next year's Holyrood election, particularly because only a year ago they were kind of neck and neck with the SNP. So I feel like if you are somebody who voted Labour in the general election last year and are now not sure because you're a bit unhappy with what's going on in Westminster, I'm not sure this appointment is going to change your mind really. She does seem to acknowledge that perhaps the change that was promised hasn't been seen as much. So I think we need to see what's going to happen there. Will she have much influence over all of that? But I think in terms of Scottish Labour, I'm not sure how much of an impact this will have on the party.
Ros, do you think Lucy Powell will move Labour to the left? Is she even of the left?
Well, you know, in my dreams, I hope that that's the case. But the reality is, I don't think she's going to move Labour to the left. But I hope what might move Labour to thinking about introducing some more left-wing populist policies, and quick, as some of the results that they've been seeing in the polls and in recent by-elections.
Sure, this wasn't what the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, wanted, was it?
It wasn't, no, and I mean, I have to say I'm mildly amused at the description of Lucy Powell being the left candidate. Certainly not the leadership's preferred candidate, but I'm not sure I'm buying the left description. All of that being said, I think the clip you've just played there, she definitely speaks to a problem that Labour has, the cultural problem that it has in facing some of the problems it's had and how it's got itself into this position, not just in the polls, but in the Caerphilly by-election in Wales last week. Which is what I'm just about to come to, because it all comes on the back of that Caerphilly by-election. Plaid Cymru beat Reform to win, pushing Labour way back into third, losing the seat for the first time in over a century. Ross, do you think Labour knows what's going wrong?
I think they better wake up and start listening. I spent Saturday on the streets with thousands of Scottish campaigning groups, community organisations and people who want to see the change happening much, much faster. And, you know, this is really a message to all the mainstream parties. If they don't wake up and start delivering for ordinary working people, then they're going to be in real trouble, because every time they let ordinary communities down, they're giving a gift to the far right now.
Rachel, how will Scottish Labour be viewing all of this?
So I think at this point, they're probably going to want to try and keep the focus away from what's happening in Westminster. The more that voters want to talk about Westminster, it probably doesn't help them in the polls when it comes to Holyrood. They will try and push the conversation onto devolved issues, onto the record of the SNP government, for example. That's what they will want to see happening. So that's probably why we're not seeing very much from Scottish Labour right now on what's been going on in the past few while, and the Welsh election as well.
What do you reckon, Stewart? Does any of this move the dial for Labour?
It's difficult to see how that happens. I mean, we'll get an idea when Rachel Reeves brings the budget forward in a few weeks' time, whether or not they've got the political nous to move this on from where they are at the minute. But it seems to me they're stuck in a bit of a doom loop, and you know, they did inherit a real mess from the Conservatives. There's no doubt about that, but they need to inject some serious political imagination into their operation.
Ros, in the budget, what do they need to do to move it on?
I think they need to tax the rich. I think they need to be really bold, really radical. They need to look at wealth tax, capital gains tax, tax on investment income, whatever it may be. They've got to do something big, and then they've got to make sure that it quickly gets delivered to the people.
That's what you want to see.
Most.
Do you think you'll see any of that?
Well, I think if they don't consider some big gestures and some populist politics, they're going to be in real trouble.
You're not holding your breath, though, are you?
No.
Thank you all for joining us as our panel in Scotland tonight.